Hello, thanks for joining us again in our little food forest here in the far north of Scotland. Today we're going to talk about Comfrey. We'll talk about what it does, the Comfrey that we have, how we use it, and how you can use your own. You may be able to see behind me here we have this Russian Comfrey, which is a sort of violet, purpley blue version of Comfrey. It's called Russian Comfrey. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the Bocking 14 version. So let's have a think about Comfrey for a second in terms of how it's named. Comfrey in the Latin is confere, which means to bring together. Sounds like a good name to have as a botanical name, but the botanical name is actually Symphytum. So there's the genus. So Symphytum, which is also interesting because, like confere, it means to make whole or bring together. And I'm presuming that they're talking about the idea that it knits bones, that it heals wounds or speeds up any sort of help that is given to heal a wound. So bringing together sounds good. Okay, so let's have a look at this. And there's a bit more confusion then we can perhaps talk about. So Russian Comfrey, here it is. It's beautiful. It's quite tall, quite prickly. You may need to be aware that it is prickly and can actually make your hands a little bit inflamed if you're not used to it. Doesn't seem to affect me at all, but it has tiny little hairs on it, so you have to be careful sometimes in handling it. So Russian Comfrey is also Bocking 14. Everybody talks about Bocking 14. There are two varieties of Bocking that are really important: Bocking 14, Bocking 4. Bocking 4, as I understand it, is the one that's used more for feeding animals. I think its roots actually dig a little bit deeper into the soil, so therefore maybe has more mineral and nutrient content in it. So that's Symphytum aplandicum, Russian Comfrey. But Russian Comfrey is also a hybrid, it's a natural hybrid between a fichinal, which is a smoother sort of version, usually has white or creamy type flowers, and a rougher version called asperum. So that's actually hybridised itself in the wild. And back in the 1800s, there's a man called Henry Doubleday, who discovered it, and maybe even brought it to the UK, and did experiments on it to see how it could be used to help in the garden and with his animals. And this later on this study was revitalised later on in the 1950s by a man called Hill, and he then cultivated the Bocking 14, Bocking 4. In fact, I think there are more than 20 different Bockings, but those are the two that we're used to. So if people talk about Russian Comfrey and Bocking, they're actually one and the same. But Bocking 14 is a cultivar that is very definitely sterile. The Russian Comfrey on its own, the hybrid, may not be entirely sterile. I think this is Bocking 14. I've had this a number of years in our garden and it's never done anything. The only time it's actually spread is when I've dug the roots out and moved them somewhere else. So it actually is in different parts of our garden. You can probably see some over here as well, amongst our fruit bushes. And we usually tend to put it amongst our fruit bushes. You can see here, this is amongst white currants. If I put the camera back there slightly, you can see that. It's in amongst white currants. So the way that we can use that is taking the Comfrey, just breaking it off at the base. We can cut it at the base and then place it around the bottom of your fruit bushes. In this case, it's white currant. Continue to break that off. Break it down to about 6 inches from the ground, or cut it off about 6 inches from the ground. Place that around your fruit bushes. And when they need the potassium, which is now while they're fruiting, this will work quite effectively. And you'll find that the comfrey will regrow. And you'll probably get another crop, another flowering before the end of September, probably, maybe even the end of August. So there we go. That's a little bit about comfrey. Now let's go and have a look at another type that we have in the garden, which is called tuberosum, which is a creeping, crawling variety. So we'll go and have a look at that next. Yeah, now this is the more common yellow variety that we have. I say it's common, there's quite a bit of it up here in Caithness. It's used a lot of the time for ground cover, and comfrey likes sun, it doesn't mind shade at all. And so if you've got an area in your forest, which I presume you will have, where it's quite dark, then this is a good possibility for you. And next to it, just across here, you have this variety. It looks quite white, it is pretty white. There's little blue flecks at the top there. This is Ecological blue, also ground cover. You can see it competing here with the sweet Sicily. But both of these we're going to be using to plant around the base of our fruit trees. We've got some of the bigger bocking variety growing around some of our fruit bushes, and we'll chop some of that up to place around the base of our fruit bushes to give them some extra feed this time of year. This is Symphytum tuberosum in a different part of the forest. It's seeded itself here, so we need to be aware of that. We're going to leave it here. It seems to be holding back the grass from these fruit bushes. We might also use it around our trees, our fruit trees, as we said. We might use the bocking 14, which we have more control over its spread. So we'll see. So this is back to Ecological blue, a cultivar, a cross, if you like, between Atlanticum and grandiflorum, or a officinale, asperum and grandiflorum, same difference really. It's a creeping version, so it won't get very tall, but it will spread. The roots are quite vigorous. It's not for bulk. If you want bulk, you would use the Russian Comfrey or the bocking versions. It's happy in the shade. If you're going to grow bocking, of course, for bulk, you might want it in the full sunshine, and hope there are plenty of nutrients, of those 17 vital nutrients that you need in the ground for it to pull up, and it will pull them up if they are there. Okay, so I'm just going to cut back some more of this comfrey. We put it around, or it grows around the fruit bushes that we have in here. These are white currants. We've got quite a lot of black currants on the other side here, which we might do a little bit later on. But I'm just going to cut around these, maybe about 6 inches from the base. And then we'll put them around the base of the fruit bush, and as they break down they'll give some benefit to the fruit bushes, particularly now while they're fruiting. Seems a shame, I know, when you see the flowers on here, and you know the bees are getting some good profit out of using these. It does seem a bit of a shame to cut them back, but they will come again. It's interesting, when I think about Symphytum as being the genus of Comfrey. Of course, the family name is borage, so it comes from the same family as borage. But Symphytum, which comes from the Latin symphio, to make whole, it reminds me of symphony, I suppose. I know we talked about the idea of Symphytum, that making whole, that bringing together, being an aspect of the knit bone idea, that it, as you use it, I mean, for example, you could use one of these leaves here. Probably better to rub it together a little bit. You rub it together and see if I'd hurt my wrist or something, sprained it, you would put it on there, maybe mulch these leaves up a little bit more, get a few more of them, wrap a bandage around it, and it speeds up the recovery. So we talked about that idea of Symphytum, but what I also think about is, as I said, symphony. So symphony, it comes again from symph, or it's actually from symphonia, not Latin, Greek. So, those sort of botanical names seem to switch between Latin and Greek. And I guess the Romans got a lot of their ideas from the Greek, so that perhaps explains it. But some of the other botanical names are actually different names as well, or different languages as well. But they're botanical, so we'll put them under that heading. But thinking about symphony, symphonia being the Latin sort of stem, and how that brings together instruments to play a wonderful piece of music, like I know Beethoven's Fifth, or I suppose with the Ninth Symphony, it even brings voices in. That idea of bringing together a forest in sort of a symphony of sound and of music, and things balancing together to grow happily. I suppose I like that idea that Comfrey has these nutrients that we can borrow a little bit for other plants in the food forest to create this sort of symphony, if you like, of growing. So maybe Symphytum and that stem of symph is not just about knitting bones together. We perhaps think of things very much in an anthropomorphic way about ourselves, but maybe Comfrey is there to help this forest as a whole. So we'll put this around the base of this white currant, and we can ponder on things like that when we do it. So I have to actually sit right down on the ground. At the moment, as I've spoken to you about already, I have something called CRPS, complex regional pain syndrome, which means I can't actually stand for long periods of time on this left leg. And in fact, I'm quite happy that I can use this right arm. At the moment, it actually has crossed from the left side of my body to the right side into this right arm, which sometimes means this gets quite weak. But at the moment, I can do this, so I can sit down and do a bit of gardening along with yourselves. No excuses. We do what we can do. There are days where I can't actually get out and do anything at all. It's hard to get up and walk at all. But so this is quite a good day. Okay, so that's thoroughly mulched this particular area here, and these white currants should have plenty of food and minerals. And so while we ponder on the finer things of symphonies and things like that, this Comfrey will be breaking down and helping the fruit on these bushes to grow, and hopefully it will mean we'll get a good crop. While we're talking on botanical names, I used to some years ago worked at a castle in this area. In fact, probably for the last 20 years, I've worked at big estates. I've designed gardens, restored gardens, and maintained gardens. One of the things I remember from people visiting those gardens, if you took them on garden tours, for example, or even if they were just walking around the gardens, they would often like to come up to you and share some of their botanical knowledge by using a botanical name for a particular plant, either trying to show their own knowledge or perhaps make you feel uncomfortable about your own knowledge. When I first started out, I remember being particularly worried about this and trying to find as many botanical names out as I possibly could and relate them to a plant that I saw. But what I found after a period of time, and I found through working in this forest, that isn't the important aspect. It's not the important aspect to tie a botanical name up to a particular plant. What's more important is what that plant needs. We can recognise it by other means other than the botanical name. Obviously we have the common name of things like Comfrey, for example. But we can also think about what it can give to other parts of the garden, and what it can do for the insects, what it can do for the birds, what they can do for each other. And when I've begun to think more in those terms as a gardener, I think that's made me a better gardener and helped the forest sort of thrive a little bit better, and helped me understand that it's not just a plant as such for our means, but it has a personality, if you like, in what it gives to the whole ecosystem that we live in. So anyway, that's a little bit of thought that we can ponder on as we go around doing work around the garden. So thanks for joining us. I'm going to leave you now, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the other benefits of Comfrey. So I'm either going to attach it to this video or we'll have another video on that. There are teas that we can make from Comfrey, which I'm sure you've heard about, that smell fairly disgusting, but they can easily be made, and we can obviously feed our plants using the tea that we create. We're not talking about tea at any stage that we would take internally ourselves, by the way. I know that there are many herbalists around the world. If you look around the internet, you'll see the passion that they have when they speak about Comfrey and the success they've had with it, with their patients and themselves. But we know that it has these pyrrolizidine alkaloids that are toxic, carcinogenic, and no good for us if we take Comfrey in the long term. This is just the means of the plant to protect itself, but we don't want to have long-term liver damage, so I'm not going to suggest that you take this internally. But we have a tea that we can use on our plants at this moment. Comfrey tea in terms of feed. Now, I'm sure you've seen lots of videos around the internet talking about Comfrey. And one of the things I find that they usually seem to miss out is why we need it anyway. What is it that plants need? It's called an accumulator, a dynamic accumulator even, because Comfrey has so many of those vital elements, minerals that plants need. So what happens then inside the plant, or what is it the plant needs? So there are 17 really important elements that are needed for a successful plant, if you like. There are macronutrients, so there are 6 of those that are no more important than the micronutrients, but they're just needed in a greater amount. So, macronutrients, what are the 6 main ones? Well, we know already, don't we, that we have in the water and in the air, we have hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon already there available. Nitrogen is in the air, but it's not in a form that plants can use. So they take it from the ground, from the soil, or there may be a nitrogen fixing plant. So nitrogen is one of the first of those main nutrients, and often is the one where you see a plant grow much greener and much quicker and much bulkier. So nitrogen is the first, and then we have phosphorus and potassium, and calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. I think I used to remember it this way: not poor Patrick carrying mighty sulfur. Anyway, it helped me at the time. So something I was thinking about was these 17 elements are something that every plant needs. So Comfrey is there to help us give it back when those minerals, elements, are washed away down into the soil. If you have a good soil, it's covered quite regularly either with a thin layer of compost, or if it's naturally covered by plants, then as they die back, most of these nutrients are available. But if not, then these plants need to search further, and if they can't find it, then they'll be affected in some way. So the Comfrey digs down with its roots, well, it doesn't really dig, probably more slithers down as deeply as possible, and it pulls up these nutrients into the body, these elements into the body itself. So it draws them up, available for other plants to use in a similar way to nitrogen fixers, and how they bring nitrogen available and ready to use. Most naturally, you would think it would happen as those plants die back, or as leaves fall, such as on the older trees that we have in the main part of the forest, giving nitrogen to the plants around them. So, thinking about those main elements, Comfrey is abundant in most of them, and the good thing is that there's lots of potassium in it. From my point of view, this time of year when we're growing fruit, you want potassium, and that's maybe the big thing for me that it's good for, is for helping on fruit at this stage when it needs those extra nutrients to grow and to build itself up. And hopefully, if it has more nutrients, it'll be a healthier tree, and maybe the fruit that it gives out will be healthier as well. So Comfrey does all that, brings up those minerals ready for other plants. We can make it into a tea where it becomes even more available in the soil in sort of manageable means that they can draw it up into themselves. Now, I know I've talked about the smell of Comfrey tea. I tend to not use the anaerobic method where we fill up a bucket as much as we can, cram it in, and then put 2/3 of water in there. And that should be water that's rainwater, usually not from the chlorinated water. So 2/3 water, and then we wait 6 weeks for it to generally percolate, smell, but then it has lots of good elements in there for the plants, and we can feed it, and we then maybe break it down, 1 part Comfrey to 5 parts water, or 1 to 10, whichever ones we think is best. But what I do is I do the aerobic way. I'm sure many people do it this way. Certainly convenience at this time of year when there are a lot of flies around. There's nothing worse than having Comfrey, and whenever time you go to use it, you're surrounded by flies trying to get in there. But also just from the smell point of view. I have roses right behind me, and even the smell of those won't overpower comfrey. So what I use, you can see behind me this bucket. This bucket has got holes in the base, in the centre of the base, and underneath we have a breeze block on either side that it stands on, and then there's a tray, like a small bucket cum tray, in the centre. So what I do is I have quite a heavy rock here, which I was lucky to get out then, and I press down at this time of year comfrey, or fruit as I said, maybe the odd bit of nettle in there as well, but that's more for nitrogen build up. So squash it down in here. I don't add any extra water, maybe rain goes on it, drops from the leaves or something like that, but in general all the moisture that comes out is from the comfrey itself. Maybe takes a little bit longer, again 6 to 8 weeks, and you've got some sort of a juice in there. Yeah, there's a little bit of juice in there. I'm not sure if you can see it from there. That's built up over a few weeks and has the same good content in it as your smelly comfrey tea. Don't forget to put your rock on the top there. It's a good thing my arm's working well at the moment. So that compresses it, and yeah, gradually the liquid inside it will start to compress down and will run out at the base into that little bucket cum tray. So that's all I wanted to talk about with comfrey. It's a beautiful day here, the sun is shining, the birds are singing. Just appreciate those birds. You might not know what their names are, but that doesn't matter. I know we had a long talk, or I had a long talk myself about the benefits of remembering Latin names, remembering the names of things in general. I think those Latin names that we try to remember are important if we're going to be discussing plants with people from different parts of the world, because then we know the common name for that plant. And it's also good to know the families that these plants are in, such as the borage family for comfrey, because then we can have an idea of what everything in that family will need and some of its attributes. So that sort of thing is important, but it shouldn't scare us away from growing as much as we want and looking in awe at it, even if we can't remember what its name. So thanks for watching once more. Take care, enjoy this weather, stay cool, and find a tree to stand under. Okay, take care now.